Hello, I'm Adrian and you're watching No Friends Gaming, because you don't need friends to have a good time. Now, while as this channel's name suggests we do solo playthroughs here, our strategy discussion is relevant to all player counts, so please stick around even if you're not a soloist. It's just that friends are optional. Now, in case you couldn't tell from the totally authentic and not at all hastily slapped together specialized equipment that I'm wearing, today we are venturing into the scorching deserts of the planet Arrakis, also known as Dune, or here in Australia, also known as Dune. Dune Imperium by the estimable Paul Denon, not to be confused with that other far less remarkable Paul, is one of my absolute favorite games ever. I have played it literally hundreds of times, and I don't mean literally figuratively. Yes, my strategy advice has been cultivated over years of obsessing over this extraordinary game. So here are the key concepts you'll need to dominate the solo mode at Kwisatz Haderach level, the hardest difficulty, or indeed to dominate your friends, since what are friends for if not to be dominated? Comparing the board spaces suggests that the following resources are about equivalent in terms of ease to acquire. 2 Solari, 1 Spice, 1 Water, 1 Troop, 1 Card Draw, 1 Intrigue card. This is a useful starting point, but what really matters is the benefits that these resources can reap for us. They will fluctuate in value relative to each other depending on the game state. So for example, Solari is particularly important in the early game when it will let you afford the coveted High Council and Swordmaster spaces for their powerful ongoing benefits. Water is great to have when the Great Flat and Hagal Basin are accumulating multiple bonus spice. Spice is really valuable in the late game, so you can afford Highliner, which could help you to win a critical 2 VP conflict. Card Draw is more valuable as your deck improves, and especially when it could help you get to 9 Persuasion to afford the Spice Must Flow. Consider these factors to determine which resources are a higher priority to pursue at any given point of the game. Now, if you're not in a hurry to get any specific resource, consider picking up Intrigue cards. Not only do they have great benefits printed on them, but simply by holding them in your hand, you may force opponents into suboptimal moves to play around whatever it is that you are hiding. So for example, an opponent fearing that you have a combat card in hand may decline to contest you for a conflict, or they may drastically overcommit, wasting their troops. Be aware of the resources your opponents have stockpiled and therefore what their plans may be. If someone is hoarding 6 or more spice, then perhaps don't count on being able to access Highliner later that same round, and factor in their potential strength in the conflict should they go there. If everyone else has at most 1 water, then getting your second water could ensure that you're the only one who can reach the Great Flat, and then you might even delay going there so it can accumulate more bonus spice. All the same, be wary of intrigue cards that could give players resources and hence surprise access to such board spaces. So here are those intrigue cards. It is entirely possible to win the game without getting High Council or Swordmaster, but as mentioned, they are powerful spaces that incentivize players to get Solari early on. Just be aware of the Solari that other players are accumulating and your own position in turn order. If someone can get to 8 Solari ahead of you, they could take Swordmaster and block you from doing the same. And in the worst case scenario, you could be locked out of Swordmaster for 3 successive rounds as each of your opponents takes theirs in turn. If it looks like that would happen, get High Council instead, or perhaps focus on other actions than gathering early Solari. In order to win the game, you need to get at least 10 victory points, or 9 in a 4-player game since everyone starts at 1. One of the easiest sources of points is the faction tracks. You will get a point simply for being at 2 influence with a faction, and you could try to get at least 1 alliance. So your faction influence would therefore account for at least 4 or 5 of your points. Other common sources of points would be acquiring Spice Must Flow and winning particular conflicts. Do be on the lookout for alternative sources of victory points, what we might call Alt VP, as they are generally worth pursuing. So that would include these Imperium cards and these Intrigue cards. As we've said, faction influence is one of the most efficient means of gaining points, and so you should try to visit faction spaces as often as you can by playing diplomacy and by acquiring new cards from the Imperium row with faction access. When you're competing for alliances, be aware of the cards your opponents have acquired that could allow them to ascend a faction track quickly. So that would include power play and shifting allegiances, as well as simply by having multiple cards with faction access. There are also certain intrigue cards that could grant them surprise influence, such as these. So you may need to get excess bumps on the faction track to keep an alliance out of enemy hands. By the same token, you should seize any opportunities you can to overtake opponents for their alliances if you can get multiple faction bumps in quick succession. Stage 2 conflicts tend to require around 7 to 10 strength to win, so you should expect to commit 3 to 4 troops, supplemented by combat swords and intrigue cards. Conflicts awarding a victory point are premium, and it would be reasonable to devote more like 10 to 15 strength toward those. And Stage 3 conflicts awarding 2 VP would be well worth investing as much strength as you can possibly muster, typically over 20 strength. You shouldn't try to win every combat, as there are other important things to do in the game, but look out for opportunities such as when your opponents have few troops left in their garrisons and may not be able to compete with you as effectively. If an opponent has committed an overwhelming force to the conflict, it would probably be wasteful to enter an arms race with them. You could instead save your troops for future rounds and settle for second or third tier rewards. Be aware of the cards that your opponents have yet to reveal or discard, so you can stay ahead of any extra strength they will gain in their reveal turns. And watch out if your opponent is saving intrigue cards in hand. You could try to exceed their strength only marginally, forcing them to play a combat card, if they have one, to beat you for a less crucial early conflict, or you could try to exceed them by at least 4 or 5 strength to thwart cards such as Master Tactician and Ambush. But for Stage 3 conflicts, you will usually want to go all out to stay ahead of the potential of multiple combat tricks. Deck building is an important but somewhat less prominent mechanic here than in other deck building games. So for example, in the original deck builder Dominion, players would typically draw around 15 hands and would cycle through their decks 8 or more times, given the prevalence of card draw and trashing effects in that game. In Dune Imperium, those statistics are effectively halved. In the mid-game, if you purchase new cards, they might only see play once or twice. And trashing is still good in the first 1 or 2 runs through your deck, but is much less impactful if you're about to shuffle your deck for the last time. Spice Must Flow becomes relevant to acquire earlier than you might think, allowing you to turn Persuasion into victory points without plugging up too many of your future hands. So from the mid-game onwards, try to prioritize card draw if it would get you to 9 Persuasion. Still, deck improvement is most potent during the early game, so during the first couple of runs through your deck. As mentioned, cards with faction access are particularly advantageous, as are those that can grant you influence or victory points directly. Here are some of the most powerful cards in the game that might even warrant doing an early reveal turn to snap up. When playing against the AI at harder difficulty levels, be mindful of the Expert Troop Deployment rule. So if you enter a conflict too early, an AI might simply overtake you and beat you anyway. But you could let the AI first cap itself at 2 troops and then overtake them. Now I know that's easier said than done once the rivals have their Swordmasters and are acting after you each round, but if there are few combat space cards left in the House Hagal deck, you could block those, preventing the AI from putting more forces into the fray. Keep tabs on which high combat strength cards are left in the House Hagal deck, so that would be these. You could reasonably take a chance that one of them comes out, if there's a low chance, but you'll generally want to stay at least 3 strength ahead of the AI, if possible, since most of the cards have 2 or fewer strength on them. That would be 18 out of 27 House Hagal cards. So, in summary, consider the relative value of resources depending on the current game state. In particular, prioritize getting early Solari if you're going for Swordmaster and or High Council to maximize their potential benefits. Go to faction spaces as often as you can for easy points. Participate in conflicts judiciously, and improve your deck early, but don't overvalue doing so. It is now time for us to confront House Hagal at Kwisatz Haderach level, so I'll see you in the next video.